So, we have, if you're, by the way, if you want to know all of our 7 sources, look on the back of your bulletin, they're there. We also have 6 sources. This is sources of wisdom that we draw upon. And there's all of them there. So we've got everything. I'm just going to go through these real quickly. So, for example, direct experience. That each one of us comes with our own personal wisdom and our own sense of connection, right? And we see that as a source of wisdom. There are the words and deeds of prophetic people. I always want to explain the word prophetic, okay? We're not talking about people who can predict the future. The word prophetic in our faith, what we mean is people who speak truth to power, okay? So these are people like Martin Luther King. This is people like Dorothy Day, people who speak truth to power. Wisdom from the world's religions. And you notice that we separate out Jewish and Christian teachings, which are also part of the world's religions. And that's in part because we know that so many people here came out of either the Jewish or Christian tradition. So we separate those two out. Humanist teachings, right, that tell us that we need to look at science and honor what it also brings to the table. And earth-centered traditions. Those can be all over the animist, pagan, any earth-centered tradition. So all of these are different sources of wisdom. And the reality is that most of us tend toward one source. We tend to draw upon one more source than others. And so this morning I want to invite you to look at each of these sources and to choose the one that you relate to the most. Okay, just the one that you relate to the most. All right? Now, which source do you relate to the least? Maybe you have a little bit of a reaction to it. It makes you twitch. Or you just don't relate to it. It's just not your thing. All right, so there's the one that you relate to the most and the one that you relate to the least. So what I always invite people to do in terms of being curious and open about our faith and to go deeper into it is to notice, like, where's the challenge of the one that you relate to the most? What's its biggest problem? What doesn't it do well? And the best way you can figure out how it doesn't do well is ask yourself, if it goes to an extreme, how does it fail? So for example, direct experience. If that is all we ever relied upon and we take it to an extreme, it can become extreme individualism, right? Cults are built upon one person's experience and their extremism. Think of Jamestown. It's that kind of thing. So think about what is the challenge of the one that you relate to the most. Not that it's bad, just want to be aware that all of these have sources of wisdom and all of them have challenges. And so that one that you also relate to the least, what is its gift to the world? What is its gift to the world? I know that some people may have come out of a Christian tradition that they rejected. But so much of the idea that God is love comes out also out of that tradition as well. And it can be a great gift. So here's the thing. How can you tell if something is wisdom or it's not, right? And here's how I do it. Does it meet the criteria of our 7 principles? Right? So even just these 2. For example, in the Hebrew scriptures, it says it's okay to stone a child for bad-mouthing their parents, or wearing the wrong clothing, or committing a homosexual act. Now we know that that's not wisdom, right? Right?
Yeah.
Just making sure. Just making sure. Right? Because it doesn't respect the dignity and worth of all people. I mean, it doesn't meet the criteria of our principles even remotely. But then I was thinking, well, what about something like the Hajj in Islam? The Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It's where you make a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in your lifetime, right? And people come from all over the world together to do this. Like in the millions, they just converge in on Mecca. And they go through rituals like circling the Kaaba, the stone in the middle, and they have to do it counterclockwise 7 times. And they run back and forth between 2 sacred hills, or they drink from a sacred well. And they spend the night on a plane. They stone the devil by throwing stones at 3 pillars. Is that wisdom? Well, it may not be my thing, but it's someone's free and responsible search for truth and meaning. That's their search. It doesn't have to be mine. I don't have to agree with something. I don't have to do it myself for it to be wisdom for someone else. And people who have gone on this Hajj have described it to be the most amazing thing. Can you imagine? Everybody has to dress the same, so it's equality, right? So everybody wears white when they go there. And people from all over the world, and everyone is going there to be good. So everybody's so nice to one another, right? They accept one another and they encourage spiritual growth. I like to think we have General Assembly, which happens in late June every year, but I'm not sure it's quite the same thing. But it is fun. Everybody goes there, wants to have a good time, and everybody's there to look good. It is fun. But I think one of the biggest mistakes that I hear people make when they talk about Unitarian Universalism to someone that maybe they don't know is that they only give their understanding about who or what God is or is not. They sometimes neglect to include the wisdom of other traditions. I've heard our faith described as, well, no one believes in God here. To someone, everybody believes in some sort of God here. And others say, well, you can believe whatever you want. That doorknob, you could call that God if you wanted to. I'm like, really? That's a free and responsible search for truth and meaning? Responsible? Is that encouragement to spiritual growth? Do we accept that everyone here truly believes, even slightly differently from each of us? And can that be okay? And when you can do that, you've gone deeply into Unitarian Universalism. So I challenge you to go deeper. Let's look at our next set of principles. By the way, those of you who are new, we don't have to sing all of our principles every time you hear them. We just put in the chant because it's kind of clever. So I want you to consider again, how do you think that these 2 principles relate to one another? As most of you are aware, I'm sure most of you here are aware, this church is democratic in the way that we govern ourselves. This is very unusual for most churches. Most churches have a very strict hierarchy that, for example, begins with the Pope, and then it goes down to bishops and archbishops and the bishop, all that. We don't. We don't have that. We are what's called congregationalist, which means that each congregation governs itself, so it makes its own bylaws, it does everything on its own. We do have a structure that supports our congregations, and that's what we call the Unitarian Universalist Association. So we are a democracy here in this church, but we don't really practice democracy much in our lives. It affects us deeply, like here in the United States, we are a democracy, right? But we don't practice it in our daily lives all that much. We actually live in a very autocratic world. It's very hierarchical, right? You have a boss, they have a boss, maybe you're a boss and you're somewhere in there. But it's very hierarchical, and so there's always someone telling you what to do, right? And so, to my mind, we don't always know how to do democracy all that well. So, I want to talk a little bit about what a democracy is, because to me, this is about going deeply into our faith. So, being a good citizen in a democracy. So, first of all, like anyone, it's simply about showing up. And that can be voting, certainly, that's part of it. But there's things that we have civic duty for, jury duty, that type of thing. Here in church, it's congregational meetings, right? And of course, they can be annoying and inconvenient at times because it's not a perfect system. The second thing is that we share. We share, in this church, we share our time, treasure, and talent. In the greater world, we can share our time. I don't know about our talents, but we definitely share also our treasure with taxes, right? That's our civic responsibility. Invite people to get involved. We can get involved as much as we want, because it's hard to feel part of something if you are not involved in it. As a matter of fact, I had someone recently who decided that they kind of didn't want to come to church much, and they decided they want to be a member anymore, and I was heartbroken. They said, yeah, I just wasn't feeling like a part of the church. And I realized that this person hasn't been here. In the time that I've been here for 6 years, I think they've come maybe 5 times. It's kind of hard to be a part of a church or feel like you belong if you don't come and get involved with the church. So, and that's the same thing with being part of any type of democracy. We have to be involved. The other part, I think, of being part of a democracy is you have to see yourself as belonging to a larger vision, right? So here in this church, we have a vision as well of creating a better world, a beloved community, right? And here in the United States, our vision is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? That we all are part of this greater vision where we want everyone to be equal, to have that right, those rights. And I just want to remind you that the government is not the country, okay? The government is not the country. Neither is the board or the minister the church. The people are. Just want to point that out. Because I love my country. I want it to be the best it can be, and I love my church, and I want it to be the best it can be. I love this faith. And so I'm involved. I'm the chair of the UUMA, the Ministers Association Nominating Committee, and I'm a national liaison for the ministerial candidates. So if you're looking to get into ministry, I'm a great person to talk to because I can get you connected about how to become a minister. And I know that there are a number of people here who have served on Unitarian Universalist boards of other organizations like Camp de Benneville and even the Unitarian Universalist Association. We have the former secretary of the UUA sitting here with us. So being involved is incredibly important. Be part of that larger faith, seeing that faith tradition grow. Now here's the thing about democracy you may not be aware of, but the word comes from the Greek meaning, right, demos, meaning people, kratia, meaning power. So the power of the people. And it takes everyone to make sure it happens. We are interdependent with one another. I need you all to do your part, and you need me to do my part. We need people to show up for jobs. We need the people that we vote in to make sure they're doing their jobs. We have to show up for whatever civic duties those are, and sometimes it's a city council meeting in which to tell them what they need to do, and sometimes it's simply to support them in what they are doing. Because I consider actually democracy our greatest spiritual practice. and it's really tough. Now, there are components of a spiritual practice. So first of all, a spiritual practice, it takes discipline and regular going at it, right? You have to do it even when it's not convenient. I think we practice it all the time. We practice it in our meetings, in our board, in our worship meeting, finance meeting. It's by listening to one another, hearing what each has to say, considering all of the options, which honestly, sometimes you want to bang your head against a wall and go, really? Yes, it is that. And then we lift ourselves up to something higher. And we go, okay, this is important to this person. Let's listen to this. Where is this coming from? Help me understand. It's where we practice compassion. So it's a spiritual practice not only has discipline, but it's also intentional, right? It takes some perseverance. You have to go into it intentionally. Even when it doesn't go perfectly and the people you don't want in power are in power, right? Or even when it gets tedious. You go into it knowing that this is what it is, and you listen to the opinions and respect others. The other thing about a spiritual practice is that it asks something of you. Now, a lot of people say, it asks you to connect to your higher power. I think, well, how does democracy do that? Well, it connects us to one another. It can create a heart space of openness and love for one another. It asks us to be transformed. That's what a good spiritual practice does. And the reality is that most spiritual practices are kind of boring, right? I mean, I've tried meditation a million times. I find it kind of boring sitting there. But we do it because those moments of transformation do come up, and they help us to become better people. If a spiritual practice is just about giving you a happy feelings, right, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's not going to stretch you into becoming a more compassionate being. When you do it, you will feel, if you are doing it, and with that kind of intention and discipline, you'll feel yourself connecting to something larger than yourself. For democracy, that might be your community, or it might even be your country. And it's not easy, not when we do it with intention. You can just let everyone else do the spiritual practice, but I challenge you to go deeper than that. So let's look at our third set of principles. So how does these two relate? This seems a little bit more obvious, but I'm going to give you a moment. How does this put together into your own world? As many of you are aware, our denomination is working a lot on trying to deal with what is known as a white supremacist culture. And that sounds way worse than maybe it is. So because no, we're not Nazis or skinheads. When we use words like white supremacist culture, it's kind of trying to shock people and wake people up. Because it's the idea that while we are not white supremacists, certainly hope not, but that we live in a culture that puts the white race at its center, right? Which in turn then oppresses other races and ethnicities. And this kind of white centering, it's so pervasive that we who are white, we often aren't even aware of it. And let me give you an example that came up recently, and I'm just grateful that I was kind of suddenly became aware of this, like, I'll be darned. Some of you know I've been getting into art, and recently I've been doing a lot of colored pencils. So I bought a set by this maker called Faber-Castell. It's a very well-known and professional quality set of about 150 colored pencils. And going through them, I noticed that there were 3 pencils titled Light Flesh, Medium Flesh, and Dark Flesh. Here's what those colors look like. Yeah, different shades of pink. Yeah, maybe. But this is what we mean by centering whiteness, right? So much of our culture is from the point of view of a white person. It permeates so much of what we do in the culture that we live in. And what seems like a little thing, you might go, oh, it's just one type of flesh, These are called microaggressions. They're little things, and it's these little things that just nibbles away at people's soul. To go deeply into this faith is to practice the inherent dignity and worth of all, to create justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. We need to put a stop to this type of white centering. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do our best within our own faith. What does it mean? Whiteness, in what ways does whiteness get centered when it shouldn't, here even in our congregations and worship? What ways can we recenter on love? So here's an example, and it's a bit uncomfortable. I'm sorry I don't have those stress balls that Rika gave you last Sunday. I thought that was such a great idea. But bear with me. So this morning, in our opening hymn, we sang a really beautiful song, Come and Go With Me to That Land. Come and go with me. Yeah, you don't want me singing. But I love this song. It's rousing. It's easy lyrics and melody. It gets that blood pumping. I want to just dance to it every time I hear it. Well, as Beth mentioned really briefly, she said, this is an African-American spiritual. If we go actually deeper into it, this was written and sung by slaves to give them not just a rousing, feel-good feeling, but to actually give them hope that there was something better than slavery. Something was desperately needed. And some have said that this was even an invitation that was given to people to be runaway slaves. Come and join me in this new land. Come and go with me. And when we know that history behind this song of how and why it was sung, it can be kind of sobering. We can see and understand the song from new eyes. And how might a black person feel about that song being sung versus a white person? Or how about a Japanese American? Or Latinx? If you are like me, whose ancestors may or may not have been slave owners, but who certainly didn't have to deal with the oppression and subjugation of our fellow human beings, if we don't treat the song with the respect that it deserves, then it can hurt those for whom the song is more than just a feel-good song, whose ancestors died in slavery and who are still searching for that promised land. Now, there are some who think that we shouldn't sing songs like this in our church. I have a colleague. She's like me. She's a middle-class, middle-aged white woman who has gone through our hymnal and has decided which ones she's X'd out, which ones that we can sing or cannot sing, based on criteria of whether or not it centers whiteness, and not the people who wrote the song. I disagree with this approach. First, isn't that centering whiteness? Right? I mean, I, a white woman, gets to decide what songs are comfortable for people. I mean, I don't know about her congregation, but in my congregation, we're not all white. I'm not going to deny any style of song that helps people feel like they belong, because that's what music does. It helps us feel like we belong. Beth and I are very deliberate. We look for diverse music when we're putting together our services. And we're learning this too. It's not easy to figure out what's the right thing to do. And we're constantly debating about what's the right thing to do, and we are learning as we go. And the second reason why I disagree with her approach is that it has to do with this thing called liberal guilt, which I think has really turned into liberal shame. Liberal guilt or liberal shame, it has two components, and one is good and one is bad. The first is that I think that people who tend to be in liberal religion have automatically compassion for people, particularly people who are feeling oppression. And that's one of the reasons why joining a UU church, because we really lift that up. And having empathy and compassion for those who are oppressed, that's a good thing. But the second part of this liberal shame is the shame. It's shame for one's own privilege or your affluence or lack of oppression. Now, guilt is one thing. Guilt and shame are two very different things. Guilt says, I have a responsibility that I'm not living up to. And okay, I need to be better at it, right? Shame says, I am a bad person, I'm evil. Guilt targets a behavior. Shame targets the whole self. And I see a lot of shaming that can happen when we start looking at going deeply into this. And we need to get over our liberal shaming and recenter on love, on compassion for ourselves and for others, to ask these deeper questions, to stumble forward, but keep moving forward. So how do we get beyond reacting with liberal shame? How can we do that? Well, first of all, I think that we need to be in relationship, right? That's the human relations. We need to be in relationship with people who know history, who talk about it. We need to talk about these things. Invite people who are closer to this song to teach us and help us understand. I know Beth goes and she gets training every year. She goes to conferences. We invite outside speakers. We can learn. And the second thing is that we can honor that inherent dignity and worth of all by knowing the history and acknowledging our own roles, our ancestors' roles in that. Not as shame, but just as, okay, I have a responsibility now. My skin color allows me to walk through the world differently, and I need to use that in a positive way. So Beth and I are going to continue to work to understand all of these nuances, and it isn't easy. And we're going to still continue to sing that song and others. But I invite you, and we'll try to remind you as well, to look at these songs and where did they come from? What history is behind them? How do they inform us today? Our faith of Unitarian Universalism, it asks something of us. It asks us to grow and to transform ourselves and our communities by living these, our principles. That is if you choose to go deeper, and I challenge you to, because being a Unitarian Universalist, it can be easy. You choose to not sail in uncharted waters. You want to stay safe in the harbor of your own ideas and life. But we humans, we're like ships. We were not meant to stay in safe harbors. It's okay to go there to refuel occasionally, turn on the office, get supplies. But we were meant to sail the high seas, to explore new worlds and ourselves, to go deep into uncharted waters, to see what beauty, mystery, what holiness is there. So let us sing together.
Please rise in my spirit.